Thanks for sharing your morning with us. For those of you who don't know who we are or where this place is or what this place does, you're currently sitting in the new museum's incubator, and it was the brainchild of Lisa Phillips. And we are one of the companies working out of here, and it's a place at the intersection of art, technology, and design. And we're Arternal. Arternal is the art world's first client relationship management tool. A lot of people know inventory, but we do client relationship management. So it's all about streamlining the sales workflow at the gallery. And what we decided to do with these panels, this is the second one that we're hosting, is be a part of the conversation, not just be a company that you pay a monthly fee to, because there's a lot of those out there. We had one back in December, which was just introducing our peers and other technology people, and helping dealers understand, let's be a part of that conversation of changing the dialogue around technology and how it can influence what you do and how you can leverage it. There's a lot of conversation around social and content and media, and we want to be a part of that conversation as well. So some of my friends here, who you'll hear introduce themselves later, are here to engage in that conversation, and you'll be able to participate as well. But we have Taylor from Art News. He's one of the editors there. Molly. ArtNet News. Yes. Thanks, Sarah, for that clarification. So Taylor from ArtNet News. We have Molly from Paul Kasman. She does their digital and communications. Robin, who does social media consulting with galleries, and she's a writer as well. And Sarah Douglas, who's the editor-in-chief of Art News. And recently launched is Daily Plinth, and you have Cornell Dewitt, who is the founder of that as well. And they'll go into more detail. I am the resident name tag guy here at Arternal. So thanks for writing your name and where you're from. Also, I moonlight as one of the co-founders of Arternal. And Steve Miller, who you're seeing in the back, he's another co-founder. And without further ado, I'll pass the mic along for introductions. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you to Arternal for having us. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, especially considering it's 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, and it'll probably be raining when you leave. We'll go around and introduce everybody, but first I'd like to say just a few words about myself. My name, as Sean said, is Taylor Defoe. I'm a writer and editor for ArtNet News. Part of the reason I'm here today is that for the last couple of weeks, I've been working on an article that looks at the decline of foot traffic in galleries. And that piece poses a lot of questions. Does foot traffic actually impact business? Is web traffic and social media engagement, are those the more relevant metrics today? How are galleries using so-called digital strategies to cultivate clients and build their business? And what I've found, not surprisingly, is that there's a lot of anxiety surrounding social media in the world today, both ideologically speaking in terms of how it impacts the way we engage with art, but also in a more practical way as well in terms of just how we could and should be using it. I think given just how much these platforms have integrated themselves into our lives, it's easy to forget that social media in general is still, in the grand scheme of things, very young. Facebook was founded in 2004, Twitter in 2006, and Instagram as recently as 2010. So I think it's important to, A, admit to ourselves that we're still figuring out what we're doing, in that world. We're still kind of experimenting. No one really knows what the answers are, and B, to have conversations about it, to bring it into the kind of discourse of the industry. So that's kind of why we're here today. So I will pass it along to the other panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into it and finish up with a short Q&A discussion afterwards.
Hi, my name's Molly Taylor, and as Taylor said, I'm the Press, Marketing and Events Director at Paul Kasman Gallery. I just arrived really 3 months ago in New York and at the gallery, and my background is in publishing. I was a communications manager at Elephant Magazine, which is a quarterly contemporary art magazine, for 4 years, and I studied publishing prior to that. So hopefully what I'm trying to do with the gallery is make it more of kind of a content provider. So as Taylor said, there's less and less people going into galleries, so what's the use in kind of hiding all of the amazing things that you have, like archival stuff, catalogue essays, videos, interviews with artists, and kind of trying to encourage like critical dialogue around your program in a way that doesn't necessarily include people coming and visiting the works, as sad as that might be.
Oh, you have one here? Okay. Hi, I'm Robin Sembalist. I'm a longtime arts journalist. Most recently, I spent 16 years as the executive editor of Art News, where I left in 2014. But many of you might know me better for my Instagram, rsembalist, which has about 45,000 followers now. And people always say, Robin, how did you get so many followers? Did you buy them? And I say no, they are organically grown. You channeled all of my years of experience as a writer and an editor into this new platform. And I realize that there's a need for this because even as Instagram is increasingly the first place that audiences and clients will come to institutions, very often they're assigned, especially in galleries, to the youngest person who might be out of grad school and is suddenly the first face of marketing in the gallery. So I reinvented myself as a consultant, and since then I've worked with museums, galleries, nonprofits, fairs, and individuals, and I help them craft a social media identity, and then I help them implement the social media and publish it.
Hi. I'm Sarah Douglas. I'm the editor of Art News magazine. And it's interesting when Taylor was talking about when these various social media platforms were founded, because in fact, while he was saying that, I realized it kind of tracks exactly with my career in journalism and art journalism, because I started at the Art newspaper running their US office in 2000. And then in 2005, I was part of a small team of people that launched Art Info, which at the time was not so common to have these websites covering art in that way on a kind of daily basis, and it was a real learning curve. Anyhow, so I sort of had to work with adapting these forms of social media as they came along, and I guess my interest in this topic is that the advent of social media galleries being able to use this tool can be seen as a part of the sort of constellation of things that is causing the death of journalism. Because if galleries are paying a social media manager and using these tools, why do they need to advertise in our publications, or so that's a sort of struggle that it poses for us. However, as I do believe in a space where we can all coexist. So I'm exploring that at the magazine. So we're a quarterly in print, and we are a sort of, minutely online. So.
I don't know if this is a mic is for that or just for that?
Does the little guys?
Gotcha, okay. My name's Cornell DeWitt. I'm the publisher and co-founder of Daily Plinth, which is a online platform for promoting video content from the art world. I got my start in this in the mid-90s, in 94, 95. I launched one of the very first online art galleries because I was a guy living in Boulder, Colorado, trying to figure out how to reach an audience of art buyers, which were not in Boulder, Colorado. And I saw the internet as a great tool for doing so. That didn't go anywhere. So fast forward, what is that now, 20 some odd years? And we're finally getting to a point where we're really seeing where most of the action is online. And I've worn a lot of different hats since the mid-90s, and now I'm back launching a platform for video content on the art world, in the art world.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. I wanted to start off with a kind of broad question about audience. We kind of operate under the assumption that we want a certain amount of followers to reach the broadest audience as possible, but obviously in terms of speaking from a gallery's perspective, only a very small percentage of that audience actually brings in money. And so I wanted to ask you guys, and maybe I'll turn to Molly and Cornell about this to start, but anybody can jump in, about who we're targeting with this social media audience, and how segregated is it, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, I think it's a really pertinent question in terms of everybody has this aim of we need lots and lots of followers. And then perhaps maybe from the sales side of things, that's not a priority. But I mean, from my perspective, it might just be kind of an ideological thing as well, but I very much believe in engaging people, who are interested in the art, who are passionate about the art, who aren't necessarily going to spend. And I think overall, to kind of have this institutional outlook for galleries, especially when there's this kind of convergence of like narratives where this big, the big galleries are growing and the small galleries are finding it more difficult. And I think shifting towards a perspective where, you're using these social platforms to become, to build your cultural capital, to be influential in a wider sense, rather than just kind of selling to a few wealthy individuals. And so that's definitely something that we're trying to do, to kind of formalize those outputs, to grow in, cities across the world, and to become, one of the strong voices in arts and art content.
Actually, can I ask you a quick question? We didn't talk about this yesterday. I'm surprised it didn't occur to me, but within the gallery, are the artists interested in having social media? Is that important to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for instance, yesterday we had a call from an artist that was like, "Can you post this on Instagram now?" And it does vary. Like some of the estates are a bit behind, and will ask for advice and how do I hashtag and can you link to this? And it's the younger artists that tend to know what they want and request and know about good imagery and kind of because that's the thing as well. You'd think that a gallery would automatically have really great high-res pictures of the works and in a kind of nice setting, but a lot of the imagery is like documentation. So like, oh, here's this work on the wall and it actually looks really bad, or an artist will send you a picture of oh, this is my piece in this museum show, can you put it on Instagram, and it's fuzzy and it looks, so yeah, they are very engaged, but it's only a small percentage who kind of get what you need to make it a good post, I guess.
I think that was a really good question, because to put a finer point on what Taylor was saying is I think that the salient question is that yes, when a gallery, and any given gallery will tell you that they have half a dozen to maybe at most 100 people who are actually, paying their bills, depending on the scale of the gallery and this sort of thing. And so why? So I think the salient question is, so then why does a gallery care to have 50,000 or 100,000 followers on Instagram? And I think that particularly Sarah points out that that artists aren't, we all hope, not necessarily in it just for the money and for the sales. They're trying to say something much broader about culture and about audience and about what they have to say about the world. And the gallery is a conduit for the artist to do that. And so I think the onus is on the gallery to ensure that their artist's message is getting out to as broad an audience as possible in as clear and descriptive and engaging way as possible. And so that's why I think you're seeing all of these galleries take, and not just galleries, we happen to have a gallery too, but institutions, from museums and auction houses and everything, are trying to engage in that conversation to kind of prove their cultural capital to a larger social audience.
I would also say in terms of the followers that it's not really about how many, it's about the who, and that the influencers on social go way beyond collectors. You have journalists on there, you have curators curating group shows around the world, you have foundations you have residencies looking for artists and people doing public commissions, you have photo editors and stylists. So influencers come in many shapes and forms, and sometimes they themselves might have 200 followers, but they're still interesting to you.
I guess to me, talking with dealers about how they're using social media, the interesting thing to me is there seems to be the potential of a super large audience, and then there's the tiny audience.
Right audience.
Right, but what it's kind of, I was saying this yesterday, but what I find fascinating is the idea that Stefan Simkowitz, he doesn't care if the whole world sees what he's posting. He just wants you to know that's for sale. So it's an implicit message. And I was talking about this fantasy scenario yesterday where someone, gets the Fairfax after an auction and sees who the underbidders are and is oh, well, I have, this person wanted this Dubuffet, they didn't get it. I have a Dubuffet like that in my inventory, and let me just put a picture of it online. And that is a message for a very small group of people, but you might have a massive audience going, what a cool Dubuffet. But whoever put that on online doesn't give a shit about those people, really. They just want to sell that piece, Anyhow.
But it's the other people who kind of legitimize that person's position. If someone's got 100,000 followers, then maybe the influential people or the people who are spending look at that profile and think this person's legit because so many other people think they're legit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's definitely part of it. I just, it's funny when you were talking about, of course the gallery's role is to promote artists, but, I still think there's that old, avant-garde notion of I don't care if you don't get it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's not for you. Isn't that the very basis of some of this stuff? And yet the social media is everyone's going to be interested. Well, guess what? Art's not for everyone necessarily, so it's such an interesting push and pull.
That's the tension right now, though, is that it's galleries are still trying to a large degree, maintain that, that aloofness, the person behind the desk, up to here, and all this sort of thing. And at the same time, they're oh, but I gotta have 100,000 followers on Instagram. I want everybody to like me.
I think there's definitely a weird tension there.
Definitely, and they're complaining about the real problem of not getting foot traffic.
But just to be clear, and not to go on and on about this point, but I don't you're talking about the person at the front desk. I don't think it's a snootiness. I think it's more artists want to engage with the history of art and the anxiety of influence and all the things that they're thinking about. And it doesn't necessarily need to be something that a wide audience understands.
Oh, yeah.
They're making objects that come out of their creative process or whatever. So, I think there's a tension. What is it going to be, a blockbuster movie? I know.
But if you think there's been recent shows like the Listen 50-year anniversary in London that had 100,000 visitors over the course of its run, and the Kusama where you have 3-hour lines.
That's an experience.
And those are two commercial galleries who say 10 years ago the general public would have no idea who they are, and now are establishing themselves. And I think a large part of that is through social media.
Of course.
As not just commercial galleries, but these kind of very influential institutions. And even David Werner being swipe up with a little finger emoji. Right. Swipe up to see more details. There's this informality which is being kind of developed, which I think it's great. I do think it's great because I think that the desk up to here and blah blah blah. People will engage, and people want art's more popular than ever, and I think just kind of loosening it up a little bit to enable that is a positive thing.
I think also what people are enjoying is this idea of talking to each other through pictures. And a lot of times you'll see artists posting their progress in their studio and the people are commenting are other artists. And it's this new kind of conversation that's happening on the public stage. But this also serves as a great marketing tool because if you are doing ceramics and people are looking for subway murals, if you are working with teens or different kinds of materials, you could be reaching all kinds of curators and journalists that are looking for people like you. So it's a great individual marketing tool.
I want to go back to you talked about the tension between wanting a lot of followers and maintaining this sort of aloof persona. I think it's about a conversation. It's about a larger conversation about kind of cultural capital. But I'm wondering how we can sort of quantify what that means. We talked yesterday about how we alluded to it earlier. How there's this kind of 90-10 split between your audience, where 10% of your audience is the one that's paying the bills, so your collectors and your buyers. But another 90%, what is the value of that 90%, and how can we sort of leverage that value to drive business? Does that make sense?
Why is everybody looking at me?
Well, I think it's also kind of the way that galleries share, for example, press coverage and set it up, and that can be very useful as well. They can leverage their followers to do events and make sure that they get people in the galleries for programming. And this is another thing that came up yesterday, is that as opposed to museums, which have so much programming that you basically know you're going to see a concert or a poetry reading, that if galleries did want foot traffic, maybe they need to do more kind of events that promise a kind of experience in the moment as a way to get people together and make it a more social space.
Well, I think the salient question is that with that 90-10 split is what do you do with that other 90%?
Yeah.
And that may not necessarily be, for some institutions, it may be a question of, okay, how do I make money off of this other 90%? Like we talked yesterday about how art fairs, there's maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people that come through the doors of art fairs that are actually spending money, but they've got 60,000 to 90,000 or more that come to the fair. So how, so that's something where like an art fair could be in a situation where they could actually, potentially monetize that foot traffic. And gallery is a different thing. How do they take advantage of that extra 90%? I think it's about telling that story and creating that. Creating the identity of the gallery. You can still engage these other followers and be it on social media or whatever it may be. That you can engage them in a way that turns them into kind of the identity of the gallery or whatever the institution is.
But I think there's also, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a useful idea to pursue, but I think basically it's like you think of that 90%, it's like you're trying to quantify like exactly how that's going, but it's more like a butterfly flaps its wings kind of thing. Like some tech guy's 12-year-old son saw a thing and told another person about a thing, and then you were going to an art fair and you're like, oh, my 12-year-old showed me that thing that somehow got to him, And I think like there's something to that because, as you said, these tools are new, right? So in a way, everyone's like investing in the future, right? Because these things aren't just momentary. You have a feed and people can look back and say, oh, but they have this. And, it's also developing that history. So, and, it's a fact that people are coming to art in different ways. This is perhaps not completely related. In fact, it's very highly tangentially related, but one thing that fascinates me is like the changing constitution of museum boards. So you have like these younger board members who, maybe they're in tech, maybe they're in the financial industries, but many of them seem to be of the kind of venture philanthropy way of thinking. So there's kind of like all of these things are in flux and there's new ways coming in. And so I think you don't know what that 90% is going to mean. You don't know how it's going to mean. You don't know any of that.
You don't know how to engage it as well. I think it's, I think there's a lot of what's going on is people are trying new things, not knowing necessarily what it's going to mean. And, and people I think have a lot of knee-jerk reactions to a lot of things. Some people love Instagram, some people hate Instagram, some people love art fairs. There's a lot of that.
But that's probably a good segue into this whole thing of like You know, is it you or is it the gallery? You know what I mean? Like, because I was gonna say like, well, you know, the way to like engage it is like, don't engage it, just put yourself out there. And, you know, if you create something engaging enough, like the people will come to it. I don't know.
But so few people can do that though, and I think that's the salient issue, is that it's like we all have, you know, everybody has businesses to run, and everybody wants to, you know, have to be, you know, the next Instagram star or the, you know, or whatever. But just saying, oh, just be authentic, be yourself. And I'm sure, you know, Robin, you can speak to this because, you know, you can't just go into a client and say, well, all you have to do is be your best authentic self and you're going to have 50,000 followers, you know. And so everybody they're like, okay, well, I'm kind of a not that type of a person. So, you know, so how do you do that?
Well, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about telling a story, which I think is a helpful way of thinking about it. I think when people talk about social media, they use the phrase building brands, which people in the art world obviously hate the idea of, myself included. But I think when we say that, we're really just saying building a narrative, or building a story. And I'm wondering, what is the story we're trying to tell? Yeah, maybe Robin's a good person to start with, given you're the resident expert on this. But what's the story we're trying to tell?
Well, I would say I think that there is a visual brand that you build the same way in a magazine you have a look. You might have a lot of white space, you might have a tabloid look, and you can craft the same kind of look in social through art direction and photo editing. And one example I was giving yesterday is that a gallery, for example, that shows post-war and contemporary might decide to have a different look than a gallery that's showing art from the last 5 years, just for example. And I think the story for the institution is from the mission, taking the mission points, going through them one by one, finding matching visuals, because you can't do it without the visuals, cross-matching that with your schedule and your programs, and again, thinking how can you mine the archive? It's a foundation. How do you put this artist as a protagonist in art history and history? And if you're a person, because this came up about the selfies, as I like to say in art history, the idea that a portrait had to have the image of a person in it went out like 100 years ago. So a selfie can be people, places, and things in your life that represent you. It can be a picture of two tote bags next together with slogans, but you have to give a sense of yourself, not just as an art professional, but as a citizen of the world, as I put it. And it's kind of portentous, except that it doesn't mean reposting every outrage about Trump. To be generous, to share credit with other people, to celebrate colleagues, to celebrate causes and things like that. And that's all part of the profile that you need to get out on social that might not be, for example, coming out in your MailChimp.
Because social media is like a constellation of all of those moments where you're kind of showing people who you are. And I think if you have consistently very thoughtful, very high quality, like perfected content, that it's just about like brand, but not brand, but maybe character of the gallery and the space and the artists. And I think if you can constantly drip that with attention, that it can naturally, like kind of the butterfly wings, it just kind of feeds on.
Definitely, and I would just add too, but that what fascinates people is process. Like back in the art news, blah blah makes a painting type of thing, right? That this is what people want to know. Who is this person? What is this thing? How did they do it? And why did they do it? And that is the narrative. How did this happen?
I mean, that was really something that drove, you know, Daily Plant as well, is because we started seeing that everybody was flocking to Instagram for really obvious reasons, which is that, you know, we're a visual culture. We're all about art. So of course, you know, something that is all about the image is going to become very popular. But the flip side of that is that, you know, looking at art on Instagram is like driving through an art fair in a Ferrari. You know, it's even, you know, some people who complain about art fairs, but like Instagram, I don't understand, but that's another issue. But now that the technology is catching up to where, for instance, people can watch videos online, that videos bring it back another step from there and provide that kind of engagement, that storytelling, and that's what we found as well, is that people love these like behind the scenes things and things that, things that a walkthrough of an exhibition with a curator or an artist or something like that you can't really get on Instagram, and it's and I think that this is something that I think can work hand in hand with journalism and with social media, and all these things work together to build this kind of an identity for a gallery or an institution in a way that kind of relied on a cult of personality, even just 15 years ago. When you look at the big name galleries, they were all just like, there's a certain amount of a cult of, you look at like Mary Boone, in the 80s, and Gagosian, from the 90s through now, and everything like that. You can kind of create that because you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox now to be able to do that, from coverage in journalism through social media and videos and everything like that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm really into video, and one of the things that I've kind of put forward for this year is that every show should have a video, maybe 4 minutes and an interview, and kind of look around the show. But obviously it's really expensive to produce, and we're really lucky because we have people in-house who can do that. But is video worth it yet on social media for like the high production costs and like in terms of engagement? And
I think we're at a tipping point for sure. Because I've seen videos. I haven't run any yet, but we've seen videos that clearly people shot on their iPhone that are getting there.
iPhone videos.
My point being that as well, that one is that we're at a tipping point. First, the technology got to the point where when I launched a online gallery in '95, it took a minute for a picture to load onto the screen, and now you can watch these things live streaming. You can see that installation of Padilla, right now live. It's kind of an amazing thing. But and I think that even just 2 or 3 years ago, the expense was forget about it. And we found when talking to institutions, from galleries, museums, everything like that. And it's funny, you can go even look on these places on their YouTube, and they maybe did 5 or 6 videos 2 or 3 years ago, and it's like 7 views, 23 views, and then there's nothing for the last 2 years because they're like, oh well, screw that, And then, but now, now we're talking to them again. They're like, yeah, we think that we put this thing on Instagram, and we got 1,500 likes on it, so we're revisiting video, and so the technology is catching up. But the flip side of that as well is that there's this kind of it goes both ways. We're also like the younger galleries, these are the people who are creative enough and are digital natives, as they say, which I'm definitely not. Who can create a great video with their iPhone and maybe a free editing software on their computer, and they can create a fantastic video, and the cost is whatever the $20 a month it is that they're paying to have their iPhone. So it's getting there, and we're definitely at a tipping point for video to really, I think, make a huge impact.
Let's jumping off that. Let's talk about other strategies in terms of their value, in terms of bang for your buck. Just mentioned videos are individual posts more valuable than video, or individual picture posts more valuable than videos? Are stories valuable? And I was hoping we could also touch on things like paid advertisements and other things like that. Where are you, especially for a gallery with limited resources, where can you get the most?
And remembering that time is money.
Totally.
I think stories are kind of, I would never post, or I would really, really try not to post anything that wasn't high res on like the feed on Instagram. I think that should be like very beautiful, or at least like for the character of Paul Kasman. But stories are a great way to do the behind the scenes stuff, to talk with artists, to kind of, because it goes away, it's like the testing platform, right? Like test and learn, and then it goes, and it's ephemeral, and that's kind of makes everyone feel a bit safer. And also I now, as a user of Instagram, watch stories more than I would scroll through a feed. So like just kind of sitting on the sofa, and it's like a TV now, I don't have access to like cable, so that's what I do. And so I think in terms of learning about events, about openings, information, I think Hauser and Rath do it really well, Zvana does it really well, that you're kind of having this, it's like a news feed, but it's also, Sutton actually, PR do it really well. There's maybe a little interview with like Mark Bradford, or maybe, so as for content and news, I think stories are like increasingly important, I would say.
I think what the stories do, even though they're up for a short time, is that they keep you popping up in people's feeds. And with the algorithm changing, this has been recommended, even though it's a lot of work, as a way to make sure that your posts are getting, or that your actual Instagram posts are getting through to your followers. I think also that the Facebook events are very, very important, and people use them to plan their times, and you can use the Facebook algorithms very successfully, and I think it's good to put money on those. I think I've seen galleries put money on, for example, a great Roberta Smith review and just quote a few words from it at the beginning. Not like, thanks Roberta for the great review, but an astounding debut like they do with the movies, and just put $100 on it. You know what I'm saying? Because in the end, if you break that up and do decide to do spends on social for strategic things, which might be a good review or the opening or even the event, and put it to friends of friends, then you're getting to these individual networks that you're trying to reach. Not the big, huge audience, but basically like, if you look at any of our friends of friends, it's going to be like all these power players in the art world, right? Like every art journalist in the country, probably, I don't know. But, so I think that even, people put as little as $5 on them sometimes just to make sure. And Facebook makes you do that, basically.
Yeah.
I'll let you answer this one.
No, I mean, I think that it's about telling that story, and I think that being strategic about it. I really don't think that what it is, it's a lot of opportunity. Like I was really saying, and as Robin was saying, there's a lot of little ways you can have a big impact, and I think that that's kind of the flip side of this story, is that you can disseminate a lot of information in a lot of creative ways. It used to be that if you wanted people to know about what you were doing, be it a small gallery or a big gallery, you would call Robin in her prior post and beg her to run a story on your show, or you call up the art forum or something like that, and you try to get, and that was it. That was the only opportunity you had. So I think that it's I think it's really a positive thing the way things are changing, but it still is there's a lot of tools, like I said, for people to kind of grapple with these issues of declining traffic and the struggles that the small and mid-sized galleries are having. But I think that it's all part of the same messaging, if you will.
I mean, one of the things that I don't know how far this analogy goes, but one of the things that I struggle with on our website is you can spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's going to get a lot of clicks? But we tend not to do that because at the end of the day, sometimes just things get a lot of clicks that we had no idea, So in a way, like, we let that go because, I remember, this is a weird example. I mean, maybe this was predictable, but we were in Venice to cover the Biennale, and my colleague Andrew Russeth said, I'm going to go to the Damien Hirst show. And he literally came back, we're staying in an Airbnb, and he's like, I have really strong feelings about this show. And he wrote a post. I mean, I was sat there. He wrote it in like 20 minutes. This thing is out of control still. When you look at our homepage, you'll notice almost all the time, it's right there in the most read stories, like ever. Is this Damien Hirst? He just trashed the show. But it was a very good review. And you could say, oh, it's because it's Damien Hirst, and because I still don't get it, And so that's why I think that it's such a weird equation. Sometimes I think like the social media stuff, because you just literally don't know what's going to take off. And that's why, maybe I'm just a total outlier in thinking this, but I just think, whoever opened a gallery because they wanted to be popular. Maybe people do that now. I don't know. So why not just do you or whatever, and I guess you have to learn the best way to do you. It's like I don't know. I just have to say this. The whole thing of social media reminds me of, if you've ever read Ulysses, Joyce's Ulysses, the part where Molly Bloom says she's trying to get him to explain what metempsychosis is in, transmigration of souls or whatever. And she says, it's who is he when he's at home? This phrase, who are you when you're at home? And I constantly think like, who am I when I'm on Instagram? Who am I when I'm on Twitter? Who am I when I'm on Facebook? And then who am I when I'm at home? And what's the Venn diagram where all these things intersect? But somewhere in that Venn diagram is like what people are going to pay attention to. And I don't know that anyone knows what it is.
But I think, though, that the overall point, I think you're absolutely right, but I think that the overall point, though, is that you can't just, in a gallery who is trying to sell work and support their artists, and they can't just like throw that out there and say, here's my Instagram self or here's my authentic self. They have to have a strategy. They have to have, even if it's, putting $10 on an Instagram post, or or like mapping it out, or or deciding if they're what they're going to do on Facebook, what they're going to do here, what they're going to put on, if they're going to make videos on and put them on Daily Plinth or whatever the case may be. You can't just kind of put it all out there. There has to be a strategy. There has to be, but at the same time, it's interesting because you're taking a roundabout route to doing the exact same thing. You're creating a persona. You're creating this business identity, getting back to your point, Taylor, that it's like people don't like talking about building a brand, but like I was saying, that's Mary Boone invented being a brand in the art. Well, actually, I mean, you could probably go further back than that. I'm sure there were plenty of earlier dealers that were like that. Obviously Leo Castelli, was and he would he would roll in his grave if somebody called him said that he was a brand, but he was a brand, and so you kind of have to still create that,
But I think, I don't know, we shouldn't go down this rabbit hole, but it's like, I think that gets to the heart of so many of the questions that people are facing, maybe, in the art world now. Is there, again, a tension between sort of what you have to do and like the very way you are that makes you want to do this in the first place, or makes it be the only thing you can do,
Well, I think a lot of dealers are that way, though.
Yeah.
And I love that about dealers, is that they feel as compelled to do what they do as artists do. It's a drive, and so there are plenty of dealers out there who, if they just put their authentic self out there, they're gonna do well, and they're the real McCoy. But some people are just like, I love this, and I want to make a living out of it, and so they have to work at it.
Right.
Some people it comes naturally to, some people they have to work.
What are
at
some
it.
of the other practical hands-on strategies that you think galleries can do, especially, again, galleries with limited resources, financial, staff, or otherwise?
I think that take the press release, figure out the talking points and the main pictures of the show. Then, instead of having 3 different people write your Instagram, your MailChimp, I mean, I've been in big galleries where different people write the Facebook and the tweets. You know what I'm saying? So come up with your content strategy first. We're going to have these 5 pictures, right? This one's going to show process. This one's going to put it in context of the person's career. This one's materials, whatever it is. And then you can roll it out in terms of the different content that you need, and you write them all at once. Because a lot of times in galleries, people wake up and they're like, oh snap, the opening's tonight. We better post something on Instagram. And I'm like, you knew that opening was gonna happen beforehand. So you can pre-write all of these all the way through for the day before, day of, 2 more weeks till it ends, however you wanna do it. All that to closing tomorrow, final day, all that can be written at once, with all of them in front of you, so you don't actually repeat yourself unless it's intentionally, because in marketing you do want to repeat yourself, and that saves you a lot of time, besides all the devices of Hootsuite and whatnot to pre-sketch.
What I do I think the press release thing is really good. I would post the first image with the first section of the press release at the beginning of the campaign, and then the second image with the second part. So each time you're posting, you're getting a bit more deeply into the works.
Exactly.
And it means that you don't have to spend, sit down and think, oh, what am I going to say for this? It's you just, yeah.
Does anyone remember Bank Fax It Back? Do you remember that? No. There was this, I'm sorry that I'm using up our time to talk about this stupid thing, but there was these British artists, they were called Bank, and it was in the 90s, and they were kind of mischief makers, and because I remember I was working at a gallery at the time, and they would do this thing where they'd take your press release and they would literally copy edit it, and they would say, like, this isn't a word, like, this is grammatically wrong, and then they would fax it back to you. They'd fax it back. And I remember I was at a gallery at Jack's, and then we got a fax back. you know? And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. We gotta fax it back. Anyhow, I sometimes think someone should do fax it back like on Instagram or something. You know, it'd be so funny, and it would actually be good for the galleries because it would get I don't know.
There was that account that was like, I call bullshit. So
Yeah.
like,
Right, there was that.
A
That was
paragraph
funny.
in a press release and like,
That was funny. Yeah, they should
does
submit
this
like
mean
that.
anything? Is it nonsense?
I think though one of the upsides though here that we're talking about, and then and I think that there's even an upside for Sarah in this is that the days are long gone where if you want to please your artists and you want to get any attention, you have to spend $5,000 to get an ad in Art Forum, and so I think that the upside of this is that younger galleries, smaller galleries, or even larger galleries, who are reallocating assets. Younger galleries, smaller galleries can, they don't need to be spending $20,000 a month on full page ads. There's a purpose for that, and that's all great and valid. But it's not necessary for the smaller galleries. And the flip side of that is that for someone like Sarah, who's obviously wrestling with declining revenue, and all this is no new story for anything, is that it's still an opportunity as well for Art News to reinvent itself and to provide this voice and to have an identity like you're talking about. It's like, is this the Sarah at home with the kids that's on Art News' Instagram, or is it what is that identity? So it's an opportunity across the board.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, the magazine has to promote itself like any gallery does, and we do, and we use Hootsuite and we schedule all our. I mean, my colleague Andrew Russeth is really the genius behind all of this, but yeah, I mean, I always like to think the reason someone would take out an ad with us as opposed to like doing, maybe if you have a choice whether to do one or the other is I almost think like, okay, you can go it alone, or you can be next to what I truly believe is great journalism.
Yeah.
So
And I think
Positioning.
galleries have a responsibility to support independent arts journalism, and we're all better off for that. And to say, oh, well, I used to spend $3,000 on this, but now I'm going to put it into social, it's just an echo chamber, right? Because you're saying, okay, because it's no secret that on Instagram, even if you have 100,000 followers, your post will only be seen by, 5. And then so if you put that spend on, it's being seen by more people, but there's still people who follow you anyway.
I mean, I'm sure we're about to open it up to questions because we're probably, I don't know, but I would love to hear from, people in the room who are running galleries. Like, I mean, one of the most fascinating things to me is this was a long time ago, but I was talking to an art dealer, and they explained to me that part of the budget for an art fair actually came out of like marketing, basically, because that's what it is at the end of the day. Like, if you don't sell, at least you're putting your name out there. And I was sort of like, oh, that's interesting, because then, between the fairs and social media, that's actually taking away from the magazines. Like, the fairs are part of it too. Like, it's this whole, I really want to understand how galleries are making these decisions. Like, where do you put your time? And I just want to mention this because it was something I mentioned when we were talking. I spoke with this dealer who closed their gallery and talked to me about, that one of the things was this person felt that they were constantly just on Instagram and weren't like in like a world of looking at art and going and engaging. And I wonder if that's something, people are struggling with, like, am I putting too much time into this thing? So,
Being too reliant, I think, on it is the danger.
Well, no, more feeling that anxiety is of like, I have to engage here because everyone else is, but not necessarily seeing a return, but having like that butterfly flaps its wings thing, and then like being, but I have to, I would love to hear how people are managing that.
Let's
Yes.
open it up to questions, comments, anything like that. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something you guys both talked about, the me versus the organization, because I think a lot are struggling with that, again, with identity and branding. So, again, when the new museum has something but the individual there, or a smaller gallery maybe, I mean, again, you script your press release, your essay, your wall text, and then all of a sudden you go wild on Instagram, and the founder, somebody might not be as comfortable with that. When do you have the, Sarah Douglas, Instagram and the Art News,
I mean, we have a president who's out of control on Twitter, you know, like real Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know. That's, to me, that's like the central fascinating question is like, because so many galleries are synonymous with you know, they have this total like founder syndrome, you know, which is why people always talk about like, what's going to happen to Gagosian Gallery when he dies, because, you know, or whatever, because they're so reliant on that one person. And they're small businesses and they're, you know, so yeah, how do you manage that? You still want to have a personal existence.
Well, I
that's
think it's a really good, and it's something I've actually wondered about a lot myself. Because you see on social media, you'll see, for instance, that like an institution like the Brooklyn Museum that has, I don't know, a couple 100,000 followers on Instagram, but then Ann Pasternak has 50,000 some odd followers on Instagram. And for myself personally, I prefer seeing what Ann's up to. You know, she's an old friend, and she's, you know, it's personal.
And her Twitter as well. You have to look at her Twitter too. It's pretty good.
So, you know, and then, but I think the question is, and so that's pretty clear though, that, you know, that an institution like the Brooklyn Museum is going to have something. But with a gallery, does a gallery could there be a theoretical situation where somebody who has 100,000 followers on Instagram, could they say, hey, you know what, I've got all these followers on Instagram, I'm going to open a gallery. And then, you know, or then the other side of it being, the other side of the equation being, okay, you know, I've got a gallery, and I'm this, you know, I'm Joe Schmo, and I've got a gallery, and I want to, do I need to have you know, I'm just starting in all this, right? Or I'm just starting to build social media presence. Do I build it as the gallery, or do I build it as the person? Or is there a hybrid that can be done? I think they're really interesting questions that I don't know the answer to. So that's, can you come up? You want to sit up here and I'll sit down and you can answer the question?
I have no answers. The gallery might have a more elegant look, you know, and all this, and you know, have a silly thing, you know, when you're seeing all this, and like, where do you, you know, merge those still? Right. When you put, you know, a picture of yourself as a child in a costume, it'll get more hits than anything.
Right.
You know?
So, Robin, what would you recommend in that situation between building a personal brand versus building a business brand? Like I said, sometimes it's a clear cut that there should be a difference. But I think there's a lot of cases where it's not.
Well, I think that if it's a single proprietor gallery, a small gallery, it makes sense to have the dealer be doing the Instagram themselves as themselves, but not switching the voice back and forth, being their voice. Once you get to a larger gallery where there's more people that might be posting, then the gallery can have one and the dealer can also have their own. And the dealer, it was almost what you were saying yesterday about how you share art news content. You don't share everything, but once in a while you give something a little push, a little help, or you really want to stand behind it, or that's when you're the dealer behind the scenes in the studio showing the other kinds of more humane pictures and sharing your privilege of your trips and whatnot.
Right.
I kind of have a two-part question. One is that you discussed about archival materials and how that's important as well, and I think that's extremely important after looking through museums and nonprofits. But because of social media being such a current, this is what's happening today, sometimes it's hard to figure out the best way to show things from your archive, especially
Videos.
Well, how? Like, what are some other strategies that you use for that? And then on top of that, what if like the gallery I work for, Clear Bloom, they have a lot of editions and books, and sometimes book content doesn't get as big as hits as like the actual just artwork. But I think those are so important, especially when it's like a groundbreaking book about artists and artist books. What's the strategies that you guys use to like promote those kind of important works that maybe aren't the most visually?
I really want, we were talking about Gagosian Quarterly and how that's pretty problematic.
I could talk about Gagosian Quarterly for the rest of the day.
I think it's problematic in some ways because the galleries, you know, it's producing its own content about itself and maybe readers aren't discerning to know this is independent and this is made in-house. But I actually think that any critical debate, you know, and discussion in terms of that is positive, and if the galleries are funding some of it, then like that's also great. And so I think a gallery website should include you know, a section which maybe puts archival material on alongside like the catalogue essays and interviews with artists on videos and the kind of things I was mentioning earlier. And with archival stuff, the problem is it's the image rights often. Like I'll spend a week trying to sign off this one image which we're posting on Saturday, you know, and so it's difficult in that sense, and so it's very time consuming. It can be expensive, so I think that's something to take into account if you're kind of pursuing that angle. But I actually find in terms of like the current, like the social media want current stuff, that archival stuff does amazingly well, because it's things that you wouldn't necessarily come across unless it was presented to you like that. You can't go into the gallery, you know, you can't go into the gallery archive. So people feel very like grateful, I guess, that you've like.
But like how will you present it? Like,
For example, say that you have that you're showing historical work. I'm surprised that more galleries don't do this. Actually, is to go and find images of the person in the studio from the time the work was made. A lot of people have things like that, so that's one way. And I think also in terms of intentionality, it's kind of like, how do you position this in the conversation of now? So there's all these post-war artists, for example, that were going to Beirut in Iran, that people that were working global conversations. You know what I'm saying? Because you're trying to remind people of your different talking points about these artists, and that's where I would start. What are the 5 things I'm trying to get out about this person? Oh, they were a great colorist. They started this technique and this thing, and find the images that get it out, and think about the ways that people are talking about these conversations now.
My teenage daughter tells me that nobody does Throwback Thursday anymore, that's kind of over. But what we found, even though, again, we're admittedly a very, very small slice right now, that the archival material, and we put it up, we do it on Thursday, and we do we call it From the Vaults, right? And people love it. We've gotten a really, really great response. So I think that, if you don't have video, for instance, if you just want to post some archival material, you could put a special section on your website, and then you could post it on Thursday, and
Do way back Wednesday.
do way back.
Or use the
Make up your own
birthday.
thing. Everybody's making it up, and and I do think that if you call it out on social media, I think that it would do quite well, because I think that people really do. Yes, the social media is supposed to be very immediate, but it's a medium of discovery, and so I think that people appreciate being able to discover things.
But I would also say just, you're talking about artist books, I assume, and things. I don't know. So we do on Art News, we'll do our retrospective where we bring back an article from the past because there's something in the present that it's speaking to. And I guess, in the case of showing these archival things, I really would go for the specific, not the general. Like, not like, here's a Joseph Beuys book. Isn't it amazing? No, what is it within that thing? What is the specific thing? There's some specific thing within a thing that has resonance that will be unexpected. Like not the book itself, but a line from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's the stuff that I find the most, that captures me.
And I totally agree with that. You have to tell them why to care. And then also, I think you can treat the book as an object. A book is a 3-dimensional object. You can show the front, you can show the back, you can show a pile of them, you can show the spine, you can do a stop motion of people flipping the pages to the one that has the cool thing. You know what I'm saying? That you want to, in an age of digital, people are really obsessed with a gorgeous book. So you have to say, what is it about this book, including the physicality of the book itself?
Yeah, so I'm thinking back to the analog world. I'm old enough to remember that. And there were always like the famous 3 C's, the 3 intermediaries of artists, curators, critics, and big collectors. And with social and digital, to me, the biggest difference is it's been disintermediated. And so the message goes straight to the underlying general public. It's more populist. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a different thing. And some of them might be consumers and some might not, but they're all consumers in the way that they can like it, and then the Kazakhstani billionaire will probably want to buy it. It has a lot of likes. So how does that change your messaging, the fact that it's going direct to the consumer? Maybe you're too young to remember the analog. Some of you.
I think that I think that there's something very democratizing about it. The fact that you can use a hashtag, and that no matter how few or how many followers you have, you can connect with networks and communities. And I think for people, these can also be. There's a hashtag called BWA for BLM, and it's Black Women Artists for Black Lives Matter, and that's a way to connect with people with similar sensibilities and interests. It's not just about selling. So I think that's interesting. And the other thing that's interesting is that, I like to show in my talks these Instagrams by Philippe de Montebello, because he's, I don't know if you ever heard this, but he's kind of elitist, the former director of the Met, and he's the last person that you would expect to find on Instagram, and he's really awesome at it. And he just does a couple of terms of phrase, it's no term paper. And again, it's this new way of talking on the public stage, and he's talking to Keith Christensen, the chief curator of European at the Met, about this Larry Rivers on social for everyone to read, and I think that's democratic for people too that are following them.
Last
Yeah. My question for Molly. At Paul Kasman, how do you go about monitoring negative comments throughout any sort of social platform, especially Instagram, where it's the top ones usually even go up to the top who are the most influential and such?
We actually, this cropped up recently because we have a Judith Bernstein exhibition on at the moment, and for President's Day we posted one of her portraits of Trump, which is out there, hugely critical, and in terms of, and lots of people commented on it being like, this is, because we hashtag President's Day, being really negative about the work, and I just think fine, leave it. I wouldn't delete stuff. It's there. The work is, it's meant to facilitate that kind of reaction, and so I would never delete stuff. I think
if you want to be in the game in social media, you have to let people comment. Otherwise, you're controlling it. It's not a conversation. It's BS. So you've got to allow all that to happen. Otherwise, it just doesn't grow.
Can I just ask one tiny question? I'm curious about this for Robin. Do you ever have to counsel your clients on no, Instagram's gonna disable your account if you put up that art? Do you know what I mean? Lots of artworks
Oh, I mean, I didn't even post the Judith Bernstein. That kind of, I guess, is self-censorship, because I have pieces with penises get taken down from my Instagram with frequency.
Well, I think Instagram, because it was
And that's your personal account.
Instagram was, I think people, that they were having posts of artwork taken down a lot, and I think there was a lot of backlash about that, and they've changed their policies, or they've changed the way that they scan. Because I did a sponsored post of Jane Freilich nude the other day, and it's kind of a woman reclining, and you can see her breasts, and they approved the sponsored post, and nothing's happened. So I think they've developed some kind of way of scanning whether this is a real naked woman or a picture.
Betty Tompkins is the game.
Right. Yeah,
so
exactly.
just figure out what's going on there.
And that's it. Yeah.
Thanks. Great.
Well, we'll stop on breasts and penises. Thanks for being here again with us this morning. Want to really thank our moderator and panelists for helping us understand more about this conversation.